You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Lanterns authorization code accepted. Logging in. Your access to the HoloNet has been approved. Please stand by.
Good evening, you're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. From Phoenix, Arizona, I'm Matt Holloway. Tonight we have part 2 of our series, Hashtag Third Party Problems. And today we're discussing the Libertarian Party. Joining us will be Nicholas Sarwark, Chairman of the Libertarian National Committee. Also, we're going to discuss the latest incarnation of Obamacare Light. Take a look at some takeaways from the GOP's new health care plan from Story on the Hill. And yes, it wouldn't be a complete show this week if we didn't at least touch on Donald Trump Jr. All that and more here on the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. Stick around.
Fellow citizens, recent events have imposed upon the patriotic people of this country a responsibility and a duty greater than that of any since the Civil War.
It is the common people of the world that are interested in this business. They know when we have war, it is they that have to bear the burden. It's their sisters and mothers and daughters that have to wait, trembling, to hear the news.
We are called as a people to give testimony in the sight of the world to our faith that the future shall belong to the free. Since this century's beginning, a time of tempest has seemed to come upon the continents of the earth.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom. Until we can reestablish a condition under which the earnings of the people can be kept by the people, we are bound to suffer a very severe and distinct curtailment of our liberty.
You're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. The new conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network. The millennial conservative resistance begins here.
Good evening. You're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. I'm Matt Holloway. Thanks for joining us. So, a lot of news to go over this week and not a lot of time to do it because we have an amazing interview to get to with Nicholas Sarwark, who is the Libertarian National Committee Chair based here out of Phoenix, Arizona. I never knew. But before we get to that, there's a couple things going on you might need to know about. First and foremost, the Senate has released its new variant of Obamacare Light. And we turn to an article from The Hill by Rachel Rubin, Jesse Hellman, and Nathaniel Wexel, which gives us 5 key outlines to remember. That this new bill includes a provision key to earning conservative support, which apparently creates a substantial improvement to premium savings. And this is such a huge issue. This is such a huge deal that apparently now Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is willing to support the bill. In his quote, he says, "If this is the bill, I will support this bill. If it's amended," he actually said amendment, "and we lose the protections that lower premiums, my view could very well change." Or rather, my view could well change. Senator Mike Lee is still on the fence, though. So we're starting to see the more conservative portions of the Republican Party vacillate. So what does that mean for the average American? Apparently the protections for lower premiums are going to be in the bill at this stage of the game, but the Medicaid cuts are largely kept in place, which is something that any fiscal conservative will be a fan of. But it includes more money to combat the opioid crisis. Originally, it included $2 billion to help combat the opioid crisis, a far cry from the $45 billion that Senators Portman from Ohio and Capito were pushing for. And the new version has exactly that, $45 billion. So we went from $2 billion to combat opioid addiction to $45 billion. This does not sound like a fiscally conservative plan to little old me. This sounds like more sweetheart spending to keep senators in their seats. Now, I recognize that opioid addiction is a huge problem in our country, but the gentleman we're going to speak to in a little bit here has a different idea about how to deal with addiction to narcotics, and I think it's one worth hearing. I don't agree with it fully, but I do believe we need to start looking at addiction as a medical issue, but we need to look at distribution as a higher crime than we see it as today. We'll get to that in our interview with Nicholas Sarwark in just a few minutes. But continuing on with the description from The Hill, this bill will keep Obamacare taxes for high earners. It will keep the 3.8% net tax on investment income and the 0.9% payroll tax on individuals making more than $200,000. So who does that affect? Again, that's going to affect your small business owners, who are the key job creators driving the American economy right now. Small business owners. This is going to hit the restaurateur. This is going to hit the general contractor who's hired on a few more subcontractors. This is going to hurt the plumbing companies, the painters, the electricians. This is going to hurt the small local businesses that are already on the ropes in so many states that have, like Arizona, increased minimum wage. So this is Obamacare Light indeed, because it's holding on to one of the most job-crushing requirements of adding yet another tax on the people who are fueling the American economy. And I think that this one linchpin is going to drive a public rejection of this plan, just as Obamacare was rejected at the onset by the American people. And so much of Obamacare is going to remain in place. The heart and soul of it is going to remain in place. And Senator Rand Paul's vote is likely going to be out of the question here. And he was quoted as saying, "The thing is that I thought we were pretty clear," he said after a closed-door meeting. "We promised to repeal Obamacare. This, frankly, doesn't repeal Obamacare. It keeps the subsidies. It keeps the taxes. It keeps the regulations. I think we're going back on that promise." When asked if this bill was worse than Obamacare, Paul replied, "Yes." So there you have it. It doesn't repeal it. It doesn't replace it. Half steps and quarter measures. Now, could this eventually get us to a full repeal and replacement of Obamacare? In progressive moves? Oh, how I hate that word. In theory. But is it likely to? Is this going to be a substantial enough change from Washington, D.C.'s business as usual to where the American people will feel that their gambit in 2016 has paid off? Only time will tell. And we're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we have Nicholas Sarwark, chairman of the Libertarian National Committee, right here on the HoloNet podcast for Lanterns Media Network. We'll be back.
Here at the New Conservative Resistance, we understand if you don't get enough of the HoloNet. So, we've made it easy for you. To find the latest on Matt Holloway, whether it be blogs or radio podcasts, go to theholonet.com or holonet.lanterns.buzz.
America molested by Ronald McDonald. It's true. Has it happened to you? 'Cause it starts with a dime and it ends with a dollar. Makes me wanna get up and to holler, hey! What has it happened to you? 'Cause it's happening all around and no one's making a sound about it. We gotta take back America, 1, 2, 3. Take back America, you and me. Take back America or we're all screwed.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network. The millennial conservative resistance begins here.
And we're back. You're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network, and I'm Matt Holloway. Joining us on today's program, we have the chairman of the Libertarian Party's National Committee, Mr. Nicholas Sarwark of Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. Sarwark, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you for asking. May I call you Nick?
You can.
All right, Nick. Well, thank you so much for joining us on our fresh, new, relatively young program here at the HoloNet podcast on Lanterns Media Network. We're right now the little conservative network that could, but the fact that the Libertarian Party has chosen to take us seriously certainly pays us a large compliment, so I thank you for that.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Now, it's funny that I actually use that phrase, that you've chosen to take us seriously, because I have to start out this interview by tendering an apology to you and to the Libertarian Party as a whole. Not sure if you ever read the story or if it ever blipped on your radar, but about a year or so ago, back in November 2016, I actually penned an article when I was writing for The Blaze as a contributor that said I could no longer take the Libertarian Party seriously after the events of your national convention. And in my most recent article leading up to this series, hashtag Third Party Problems, I put right in there, toward the end of it, that I do owe the Libertarian Party, Matt Welsh, and also libertarians everywhere, an apology for that, because I judged too soon, and I fell into the same trap that conservatives everywhere do, is that when the Republican Party fails to bring us what we need, we turn at the absolute last second to third parties and wonder why we don't have a big influence on the views of that third party, and we wonder why it's not a winning ticket. So I'm trying to encourage people, and I'm trying to encourage my listeners and my readers to take a good look at the third-party options that are available now in 2017, well before the big 2020 elections and the upcoming 2018 elections, and start now, not 6 months or 3 months before the election when it's far too late to become involved.
That's really good advice.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and as I said, I hope you accept my heartfelt apologies for that article.
I think, having been a Trump voter is probably punishment enough for you.
Indeed. As I said, I've never done that many consecutive face palms as when I read his Twitter.
He is an interesting man.
That he is, and I backed Ted Cruz prior to the Republican National Convention, and after that I started looking to Austin Peterson and to the Libertarian Party as a whole. And it came to me as quite a shock that the Libertarian Party's beliefs and planks and policies didn't line up 100% with my own. Came to me as quite a bit of a shock. But I tend to lean a little more socially conservative than most libertarians do. So, number one, what is the current state of the Libertarian Party? And number two, can conservatives and constitutionalists look to the Libertarian Party as a home for the political refugees in the event the Republican Party should disperse or have some sort of internal fracturing?
So the state of the Libertarian Party right now, we are one of only 3 national political parties in the country. We have our own headquarters just outside Washington, D.C. We are organized and have affiliates in all 50 states in the District of Columbia. We were on as many ballots in 2016 as the 2 old party candidates. So we are the only serious alternative to the 2 old parties. And as far as whether conservatives and constitutionalists can find a political home in the Libertarian Party, like I was telling Glenn Beck when I was on his show a month and a half ago, they can. We have many social conservatives in the party. We have many conservative Christians in the party. Despite what kind of stereotypes people might have about the Libertarian Party, we run the broad spectrum from very socially conservative to very socially liberal. The point of agreement that everyone in the Libertarian Party has is that we are not going to use the government for me to make you live your life the way I want to, and you're not going to use the government to make me live my life the way you want to. And within that context, we can have people who have very different personal views or values working together to empower individuals to pursue happiness any way they choose, as long as they don't hurt other people and they don't take their stuff. And so if you can let go of wanting to use the government to tell other people how to live their lives, then the Libertarian Party is probably a much better political home than either the Republican or Democratic parties.
Well, I myself, and a lot of people who listen to Lanterns and read Lanterns, I'm a fierce 10th Amendment advocate for the restoration of state sovereignty and taking back control from the federal government. And these tend to align with the Libertarian Party platform from what I understand of it. Because I don't know about you and how Mrs. Sarwark work politically speaking, but Mrs. Holloway and I, we bounce things off of each other all the time. And I was explaining to her the Libertarian Party just the other day because we were discussing this interview. And the way I explained it for the sake of brevity, was that the Libertarian Party is the antithesis of, for example, communism and collectivism as a concept. It's the same extreme, but the individualistic extreme. Would you call that a fair analysis?
That's a pretty fair analysis. The biggest thing with the Libertarian Party is people can band together to do stuff. So if you guys want to all live in a communal home and share your resources, as long as it's voluntary and everybody agrees to it, that's fine. If you want to have a religiously conservative home, that's fine. The place where we sort of diverge from places like the 10th Amendment Center or, some of the more hardcore constitutionalists is our platform, our prime goal is the idea that there are two opposite things. There's individual freedom and there's government control. And we want to maximize individual freedom on every issue all the time. One of our presidential candidates who's now passed away, when he was seeking the nomination, had the slogan, all of your freedoms all of the time. And it's something that I like to use. And so the 10th Amendment can be great. It was great for when I was in Colorado, we were spearheading the legalization of marijuana in that state, where a state had said, we're not going to make this criminal. We're going to make this legal for people to put stuff into their own bodies if they so choose, and, kind of use that 10th Amendment power for good. At the same time, when you had states denying equal protection of the laws to gay couples who wanted to get married, that's an application of the 10th Amendment that is opposed to individual rights, and that's why that eventually went to the Supreme Court with Obergefell. And that's been something that's been in our platform since the 70s. We didn't get there in the late 2009, 2010, 2011 like the Democratic Party did. We've been there since the beginning. And so if you look at it through that prism of we're trying to maximize individual liberty, that's kind of how you can derive the libertarian view on pretty much any issue. So a lot of the time, the 10th Amendment can be used for good. Some of the time, the 10th Amendment's used for bad. Our position is not one that says, local is better than federal. It's one that says more individual freedom and less government control, as long as people are not being, violent or hurting other people or stealing from other people. That's kind of the best case scenario for us. So does that clarify it a little bit for you?
It absolutely does, and I appreciate the fact that you did bring up legalization of marijuana and also gay marriage, because those are some sticky topics that many political operators and chairmen of parties would rather avoid engaging. So the fact that you clutched it with both hands speaks volumes. And I think that really speaks to the libertarian credo. Now, a lot of conservatives, especially a lot of religious conservatives, I lean more constitutional conservatism. Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm not here to force that on the rest of the country. Many more religious conservatives ask, where's the line when it comes to narcotics? Is the Libertarian Party going to want to turn the United States into the next Amsterdam? Is the Libertarian Party the party of do whatever feels good? How do you answer that?
Well, Amsterdam, no, definitely not. There's way too much government regulation in the Netherlands.
Agreed.
No, the Libertarian Party, where we draw the line is when I'm trying to make you take narcotics. That's where we draw the line. When I'm trying to force you to do something you don't want to do for your life. So we don't draw the line on a particular substance. I have it on pretty good authority that drinking Windex is not good for you, and you're very likely to suffer some ill effects if you do it. I don't think we need a law that says, it's a felony for you to drink Windex. I think people, as long as you're not making other people drink Windex, it'll sort itself out. And the application of law enforcement and the criminalization, especially of drug use, has a lot more cost than it has any benefit. I was a public defender in Colorado for 5 years, and I had lots of clients who did meth. And a lot of them ended up in jail because, it kind of broke up their life a little bit. They needed money. They stole stuff. Sometimes they go into jail for possession. Meth didn't seem like it was really working for most of them. That's kind of QED because they're in jail. But being in jail didn't help a single one of them. Having a felony on their record so they couldn't get a straight job when they got out of jail didn't help a single one of them. Having to go to probation appointments so that they missed work and they got fired from their job didn't help them. Being told that they weren't allowed to live with their family or live in the housing that they had because now they had a criminal record didn't help them. What we do in the name of the drug war destroys lives, and primarily lives of people of color, much more so than white people. And so you have this racist war on drugs in which drugs are actually winning. And it's not only ineffective, it's immoral for you to take the government and say, we're going to use police and guns and cages to stop you from drinking Windex. That's just, that's where we draw the line. As long as I'm not making you do the drugs, then it's none of my business.
Well, the question that I would pose then is kind of the logical extension. If we were to remove all narcotic laws from the system, is there or is there not an inherent violence that is attached to, say, advanced hallucinogenics and drugs with psychotropic properties?
No more than there's an inherent violence that you could say with alcohol. I mean, I had a good friend, Tony Ryan, who was a Denver cop, decorated, retired after decades on the force. He would tell me when the Broncos lost, he wasn't called out to places where, people were smoking marijuana or shooting up heroin or anything like that. It was always guys who got drunk and then, took it out on their wife. So there is no violence that's inherent in using a particular substance. The violence should be criminal, right? You don't get to hurt other people and you don't get to take their stuff. But imposing that judgment and saying that because some people use this substance in a bad way, or some people can't handle using this substance and commit other crimes that are actual violations of other people's rights, that we have to make it a crime to use the substance, it's just, it doesn't work that way. And I think, we cause more damage trying to protect people from themselves rather than letting them be adults. One of the things that people analogize this to is that the Democrats traditionally have wanted to be your mommy, and the Republicans have kind of wanted to be your daddy and, use some strict morality to put you on the right path and law and order and all that stuff. And libertarians really just want to let you be an adult. They want you to grow into a fully actualized human being who makes good choices and bad choices and, suffers the rewards and the pain of making right choices and making wrong choices and actually grows.
So the long and short of it is, with the exception of very limited parameters, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, the stance is that you can't legislate morality.
Pretty much. I mean, you can try, but then once you start legislating morality, this is why the culture wars were so bad during the late 90s and early 2000s, was both sides knew whoever got in charge and controlled government was going to make the other side live the way they didn't want to live. if we agree that nobody's going to try and use laws to force other people to live according to our values, we can actually have much more productive conversations about what the right values are. It makes it safer to disagree. Even in the culture wars that are going on now, they usually come down to people trying to pass laws to either prohibit or, give special government privilege to some kind of personal behavior that really shouldn't even be the government's business. If you don't like gay marriage, then don't get one. If you don't like heroin, then don't use it. Ron Paul famously in a Republican primary debate said, if heroin was legal tomorrow, how many of you in the audience are going to go out and start using heroin? Nobody raised their hand because, the people that want to do that stuff already kind of do it. And most of us know that it's probably not the best thing if we want to have a good quality of life.
I appreciate you delving so deeply into probably what's one of the most divisive subjects between mainline conservatives and libertarians. We're going to take a really quick break, if you can hang with me through that. After that, I want to kind of jump to foreign policy a little bit just to round out the discussion and kind of complete the portrait that we're painting of the Libertarian Party. But I did want to close with this before we go to that break. I think you espoused one of the core tenets that we're trying to get back to here on the HoloNet. We call ourselves the New Conservative Resistance. Prior to that, we said the Millennial Conservative Resistance, but I thought that was a little too exclusionary. Is the tenet that we used to live in a country where it was okay to disagree and where there was actual respectable opposition rather than this dichotomy and this culture war, as you put it. And I feel we need to get back to that status where it's not just all right to disagree, but it's critical that we disagree for the political health of the country from time to time. So we're going to go ahead. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then I'll have you respond to that when we come back.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network. The Millennial Conservative Resistance begins here.
And welcome back. We're here on the HoloNet podcast with the Lanterns Media Network, and still with me is Nicholas Sarwark, who is chair of the Libertarian National Committee. Nick, thanks for sticking with us. I know a half an hour is a long stretch to go on a podcast, but I think we're really making some solid headway in our discussion. Now, prior to the break, I had remarked that we need to get back to being a country where it's not just all right to disagree, but where it's celebrated and where it has political value, and you were about to respond.
Yeah, I think I don't learn much from people that agree with me. You get sort of recharged talking to people that are all on the same page, but you learn from people that don't agree with you, and it's that disagreement becomes more valuable and becomes safer when there are ground rules. You know, that no matter how much we disagree, no matter who gets more votes at the end of the day, you're still going to be able to live your life the way you want to. I'm going to be able to live my life the way I want to. And we're not going to use the government to, force other people to make decisions that we wouldn't, or that we want them to make, or to take their money to fund things that they wouldn't do voluntarily.
Spot on, Nick. And I have to say, in my own life, when I want to hear from somebody who I largely agree with, I'll turn on the Blaze and I'll listen to Glenn Beck, or I'll listen to Buck Sexton or somebody like that. When I need to get out of my echo chamber, that's when I turn to Chris Merrill here in Phoenix, and actually joined him on his show last week prior to launching this podcast series, and he seemed excited about it. So I don't know if you've had a chance to work with him or listen to him yet, but definitely a good place to get out of the conservative echo chamber.
Sounds cool.
So what I wanted to really broach with the last portion of our conversation here was the foreign policy considerations of the Libertarian Party. Now, the Republican Party has long been held to be far more jingoistic, far more interventionist, thank you to the neocon movement under President George W. Bush. And the Democratic Party is held to be the more diplomatic party, the party of apologists, who are trying to diminish the stance of the United States on the world stage. Where would you fit the Libertarian Party into that foreign policy spectrum?
Like many things, left and right become a lot less meaningful once you're a libertarian. The Democratic Party used to be the interventionist party under Wilson, definitely under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They used to be the ones that are like, hey, let's go send the Marines and make other countries do what we want them to do, typically on behalf of large corporate interests. And then the neoconservative movement, got the Republican Party to be the ones who would say that they're going to spread democracy, but democracy seemed to be spread always in places that had oil. So the libertarian position is kind of like, if you had to go back to a historical parallel, it's very similar to what Teddy Roosevelt used to say, that we should walk softly and carry a big stick, that we should have a vital national defense to protect us from threats, or attacks from foreign nations. But we shouldn't go out there and get our military intervening in other countries' civil wars. We shouldn't be going to other countries and using our guns to force them to pick a government that we want them to pick. If you look at all of the blowback, all of the terrorism that we've had going back, even before Osama bin Laden, if you listen to what people say, they say the reason that they're so mad is that we've gone into their country and occupied it with military bases. We've gotten rid of governments that were either democratically elected or at least popular. And basically, we've just stuck our nose in other people's business. You saw this in Vietnam. You saw it in Afghanistan, both when the Soviets did it and then when we did it. You saw it in Iraq and Iran and the revolution. All of this stuff goes back to our government trying to use our soldiers' lives, our tax money, to go and make other governments do what they want them to do. And the libertarian foreign policy is a lot more like, hey, let's have free trade, let's have, easy immigration both back and forth, let's have people be able to go visit, let's have person-to-person contact and individuals, either trading goods with or visiting or finding out more about other countries' cultures. And let's not get involved in choosing up sides in these armed conflicts where, it's our soldiers that die for other countries' interests.
Thank you for the breakdown. How would you respond to criticisms that if we were to withdraw our global presence and our force projection, that would welcome other also interventionist countries to step in and fill that power vacuum, such as Russia and China?
Russia has, basically almost no money comparatively to us. China's getting bigger, But if you look at how China actually does their force projection, they don't do force projection. China doesn't build military bases around the world. They go and do development projects. They do partnerships in Africa. They, help build factories.
I'll rebut that could be changing now that we're seeing indications that the Chinese are constructing sophisticated aircraft carriers reverse engineered from their Soviet purchase several years ago. They've launched their own domestically grown aircraft carriers. They're constructing artificial islands in the South China Sea, which are little more than stone aircraft carriers for all intents and purposes, and have recently announced they'll be constructing a military base in Djibouti off the coast of Aden on the Horn of Africa. So we do see them kind of pivoting to that now. Granted, they have not historically been that way, but we could be seeing a pivot in that direction.
I must have missed the part where Djibouti and or the South China Sea became part of the United States, but maybe it happened while I wasn't paying attention.
Well said.
No, it's not our business. If you want to go overseas seeking monsters to destroy, there's always a monster to destroy. It's just weird. We pick and choose the monsters that happen to align with corporate interests here in this country. So, we went and intervened in Albania and Kosovo in the 90s because, we had a beef against Slobodan Milosevic, and we wanted to maybe distract from certain political scandals here at home, but we didn't do anything to deal with either Rwanda or, any of the genocides that were going on in Africa, even though the loss of life was much larger, and if you're looking at it as strictly humanitarian grounds, there was much more justification for going over there instead of into Europe. That when you let go of the idea that the United States has some sort of mission to change the rest of the world or be the policeman for the rest of the world, everything gets a lot easier. And so, I think you're engaging in something that conservatives often do, where they presuppose that we have to do force projection because we've done it for a while. And they don't go back to the question of, I don't know, does the Constitution authorize us to go and fight in, I believe we're in 7 armed conflicts overseas with, let me think of how many declarations of war, 0 declarations of war. So, if people are really constitutionalists, then be a constitutionalist, right? Let's work on your yardstick instead of mine.
Well, I can't deny the basis that you have in the Constitution there and the Declaration of War. That's a power that's been usurped by the executive ever since the War Powers Act, and definitely needs to be restored to the halls of Congress where it belongs. Nor can I deny the roots in the founding that you're drawing from there, where George Washington even cautioned us against foreign entanglements. So
right.
I would say there is historical and constitutional grounding in what you're saying. I do.
Why are we in NATO? Tell me why we're in NATO.
As a holdover from World War II, historically speaking.
Yeah, to stop the Soviets. But there are no Soviets. So why are we still there? So that we can get embroiled in other people's conflicts? I mean, it's ridiculous.
And I could make the same sentiment for the United Nations on the same stroke.
At least they only talk. The United Nations talks. NATO, is kind of a military club, and it's one that we overly fund and they underly fund. The United Nations, I would prefer the United Nations to NATO, because the United Nations is more of a diplomatic thing, and one of the least dangerous things governments can do is send diplomats to go talk to each other. It's kind of like when Congress, people complain about Congress going on recesses. I think it's kind of awesome, and they should probably take longer breaks because they can do less damage when they're not in session.
You and I will agree there. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on, Nicholas, and spending some time with us and giving us a glimpse into the world of the Libertarian Party, and honestly, I see more areas where we're similar than we're different. I know that we have differences in foreign policy concepts, and we have differences on some domestic policies, but I don't feel it's anything that's insurmountable, looking from a constitutionalist perspective and a possibly more socially conservative perspective to the Libertarian Party. And I do believe that we are looking on the age of coalition politics becoming the norm here in the United States, and that I think that alignment could be nothing but beneficial. Where we agree, we should work together. Where we disagree, we should debate, and debate heartily. And I wanted to thank you for your time and for indulging us in that debate today. Was there anything you wanted to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, whatever disagreements we may have with conservatives in the Libertarian Party, I promise you they are less than the disagreements that you have with the actual policies of the Republican Party. And I encourage everybody, yourself included, to go to lp.org, sign up for our email list, read our platform, and then really do some serious soul searching and sit down and ask yourself, are your disagreements with us on maybe 20% of the issues really that much worse than the fact that the Republican Party hasn't lived up to 100% of the things that they supposedly believe?
I appreciate that, and I would encourage my audience to do the same, to do that research, and that's the entire point of this series, #ThirdPartyProblems. Now, after we go to a quick break here, we're going to discuss one place where I feel the Republican Party definitely isn't living up to their promises, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, which is with the latest incarnation of Obamacare Light. Which I know you're probably sinking your teeth into as we speak. That's what we're going to explore next on the HoloNet podcast. And I want to thank you again for being with us, Nick. It's amazing to me that I never realized you were based right out of Phoenix, Arizona. I probably work about 15 minutes from the dealership that your family founded here in 1942. And I just found that amazing. And you're about 7 years older than me. Here I am in my I'm 30 years old. I believe you're 37 if Google's to be trusted. And I'm at the tail end of what they still consider a millennial. I think you would be just barely Gen X. And
yeah.
And it's amazing to me that the Libertarian Party is being led by someone that I could have very well gone to high school either just after or with.
Yep. It's an exciting time to be a libertarian, let me tell you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and I hope you may join us again in the future, and by all means, you're always welcome to do so, or if you want to send anything into the holonet.com, I'll be sure we can get something put together for you there as well. I believe you also have your own blog in addition to your work you do with Reason.com. Did you want to give our audience that blog?
Actually, the probably the best way to follow me is either on Twitter, it's @nsarwark, or on Facebook, which is Facebook/nsarwark, or on Snapchat, which is, you guessed it, nsarwark. Also on Instagram, nsarwark. It's good to have a pretty distinctive last name.
It definitely helps. Luckily for me, there aren't too many Holloways running around doing podcasts. But thank you again, Nick, for joining us, and God bless. I'll look forward to hearing from you more in the future, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank Nick Sarwark and the Libertarian Party for taking the time out today to join us here on the HoloNet podcast on Lanterns Media Network. I did want to leave off with my kind of closing thought on the latest situation with Donald Trump Jr. and the email that he released by Twitter indicating that a meeting took place between he and the prominent Russian lawyer. I'm not even going to attempt this name. Oh, heck with it. Natalia Veselnitskaya, who was apparently in the United States on a special type of parole, as Fox News has confirmed, after she was initially denied a visa And, it appears that the Obama administration actually allowed this woman into the country, despite her somewhat questionable affiliations within the Russian Federation. Now, very recently, President Trump defended this meeting, citing it as opposition research, which is very standard in politics, and that it was a very fast meeting, and that most people would have taken that meeting. I have to push back against this and say that most people, especially if they're working with seasoned political operatives like Paul Manafort, would know better than to engage a foreign national relative to a presidential campaign. I mean, even if it wasn't illegal, the optics are terrible. Think about Hillary Clinton's connections to Saudi Arabia and the Clinton Foundation. I mean, how badly did that resonate throughout the country that the Clinton Foundation was little more than a slush fund for political favors from the would-be Clinton administration? Well, this very much smacks of the same. So I think, at the very least, this is clearly a solid case for Donald Trump Jr. to be removed from any positions of responsibility or influence in the administration, and I think that's a logical step that the Trump administration is going to have to take. Even if there are no criminal charges, and even if any investigation comes up dry that there was no campaign issue here, that there was no breach of the law with regard to engaging a foreign national for the purposes of a campaign, it still is horrible optics. And as much as you always love to see a father stick by their child, and as hard as that is, I think that the Trump administration has to separate itself from this rather egregious error, and that everyone who's involved in it, Donald Trump Jr., Manafort, they need to step away for the good of the administration and for the good of the country. And if President Trump doesn't call on them to do so, I feel they should voluntarily do so themselves, to put this behind us and get to the more important work of actually repealing and replacing Obamacare and beginning the severe backlog, the 8-year backlog of Obama-era errors that need correcting, of the tax reform our nation never saw. We need to get back to the business of being the American people and of being the American nation. And the only way we're going to do that is if we can work our way past this nothing burger, as the Trump administration and Trump supporters love to call it, by removing even the very possibility of collusion. Avoid even the appearance of impropriety. And I think that's what needs to happen here. So with that, I go ahead and leave you for this evening. Thank you for listening to the HoloNet podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network. I'm Matt Holloway. If you'd like to follow us, you can follow us online on Facebook.com/HoloNet, theholonet.com, holonet.lanterns.buzz, and follow on Twitter @MattDHolloway or @TheHoloNet. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you, and good night.